For 5 years, I was my dying mother's full-time caregiver in the home she left me. Weeks after she passed, my wife and her brother changed locks. "You've been a freeloader long enough," my wife said. She thought she was taking everything. She didn't know about the one thing Mom left me, the truth, hidden in a letter that would ruin her. The silence was the hardest part. For 5 years, this old craftsman house had been filled with the managed sounds of a life drawing to a close. The rhythmic sigh of the oxygen machine in my mother's bedroom, the soft shuffle of my slippers on the hardwood floors during late-night checks, the low murmur of the television playing old black-and-white movies she loved. Now, 3 weeks after her funeral, the silence was a physical presence. It was heavy, suffocating, and it echoed with everything I had lost. My name is Michael. I'm 48 years old, and for the last half-decade, I was my mother's full-time caregiver. I used to be an architect, a man who built things. But when Mom got sick, really sick, with the kind of illness that slowly, cruelly steals a person piece by piece, there was no real choice to make. I packed up my drafting table, put my career on hold, and moved back into this house, the house where I grew up, the house where she wanted to die. My wife, Claire, had called it a noble sacrifice. At the time, I believed her. Now, in the crushing silence, I wasn't so sure what it was. Grief is a strange, disorienting fog. I'd find myself making 2 cups of coffee in the morning out of habit, or starting to cut the crusts off a slice of bread for a lunch that no one was waiting for. Every corner of the house held a memory. The worn spot on the arm of her favorite recliner. The faint scent of her lavender soap that lingered in the upstairs bathroom. The giant oak in the backyard that Dad had planted, its branches now bare against the gray November sky, looked as weary as I felt. But grief is never clean. It's messy, tangled with other, less noble emotions. And if I'm being truly honest, there was a dark, ugly thread of guilt woven through mine. I love my mother more than words could say, but those 5 years have been brutal. There were nights, long and agonizing, when her pain was relentless and my exhaustion was a physical ache deep in my bones. I remember one night, around 3 a.m., she had been calling for me every 20 minutes. I was running on maybe an hour of sleep, my nerves frayed to non-existence. When she called my name again, her voice thin and reedy, I had stormed into her room. "What is it now, Mom?" I'd snapped, my voice louder and harsher than I intended. The look on her face, a flicker of fear and confusion, shattered me instantly. I was on my knees by her bedside a second later, apologizing, my own tears mixing with hers. But the damage was done. I had seen a part of myself I never wanted to see again. In that moment, I hated myself more than I had ever hated anything. That guilt became a shadow that followed me, a debt I felt I could never repay. And it was a weakness. I just didn't know yet how thoroughly it would be exploited. Claire had been my wife for 15 years. During my mother's illness, she played the part of the supportive spouse beautifully. She'd bring home expensive takeout, sighing about how I deserved a break from cooking, even though she knew Mom could only manage simple broths. Our friends praised her for being so strong, for holding down the fort. But her support had sharp edges. She rarely spent the night here, preferring our own small condo across town, saying she needed a mental break. Her visits grew shorter, more perfunctory. She'd kiss my cheek, her lips cool, ask how Mom was in a hushed tone, and then spend most of the time on her phone in the kitchen, texting. Her brother, Kevin, was a more frequent visitor, mostly because he was perpetually between jobs and looking for a free meal. He's 2 years younger than Claire, with a practiced charm that couldn't quite hide the scent of desperation. He'd lounge on my father's old leather sofa, beer in hand, and make comments laced with a unique blend of pity and condescension. "Must be nice, Mike," he'd say with a smirk. "No deadlines, no boss. Just hanging out." He made my life's most difficult work sound like a vacation. I'll let slide. For Claire. For the sake of peace. The tension between Claire and my mother had always been a quiet, simmering thing. Claire came from a different world, one of flash and appearances. My family was old money, but the quiet kind. We valued legacy, not labels. I remember one Thanksgiving, years before Mom got sick. Claire had shown up flaunting a new designer handbag that cost more than my first car. She placed it on the sideboard like a trophy. My mother, ever observant, had glanced at it after dinner. "It's lovely, dear," she said, her voice soft but her eyes sharp as glass. "I hope it brings you as much joy as financial security does." A direct hit. Claire's smile froze on her face. She was silent for the rest of the evening. Later, I had to spend an hour soothing her bruised ego, explaining that was just Mom's way. I was always the peacemaker, the emotional buffer between the two worlds. I thought I was keeping the family together. I see now I was just enabling the decay. After the funeral, as the last of the casseroles were eaten and the sympathy cards stopped arriving, the atmosphere in the house began to shift. It started subtly. Claire and Kevin would have hushed conversations in the living room that would stop the moment I walked in. Kevin started measuring walls, talking about where a 70-inch television would fit best. "We need to let some light into this place," Claire said one afternoon, gesturing vaguely at the heavy damask curtains in the dining room. "It's so gloomy." Gloomy. She was talking about my mother's taste, my childhood home, as if it were a run-down property she'd just acquired. I felt a prickle of anger, but I pushed it down. My guilt was always there to quiet me. "She's just trying to help you move on," a voice in my head, a voice that sounded a lot like Claire's, would say. "You were miserable here. You know you were." A few days later, I found my mother's private papers, which I'd kept neatly stacked in her desk, had been moved. I asked Claire about it. "Oh, I was just helping organize," she said breezily. Things were such a mess. But it was in her eyes that I saw the truth. A cool, appraising look. The look of someone calculating value. The same look she'd had when she first saw the house years ago. My mother had seen it too. I remembered now, with a painful clarity, the day she had her last long meeting with her estate lawyer, Mr. Davies. She was tired when he left, but her eyes were resolute. She took my hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "A good man's heart is his greatest strength," she'd whispered, her breath catching. "And his greatest vulnerability. A wise mother protects both." I had squeezed her hand, thinking she was just being sentimental. I didn't understand. I didn't understand at all. I was a son, grieving a mother. I was a husband, trusting a wife. I had no idea that in the quiet, grieving halls of my own home, I had become the obstacle in a cold and calculated plan. The 3 weeks following my mother's funeral were a blur of administrative tasks. Closing accounts, sorting through a lifetime of possessions, and trying to navigate the labyrinth of my own grief. Through it all, Claire and Kevin's presence in the house grew larger, more proprietary. They moved through the rooms with an air of ownership that set my teeth on edge. My role, it seemed, was to be the grieving son, locked in the past, while they, the forward thinkers, planned the future. A future that, I was beginning to realize, might not include me. Their strategy was subtle at first, a masterclass in gaslighting disguised as loving concern. Every time I tried to assert an opinion about the house or my mother's belongings, I was gently steered aside. "I think I'd like to keep Mom's writing desk in the study," I said one afternoon, finding Kevin eyeing it with a tape measure. Claire put a hand on my arm, her touch feather-light, but her grip like steel. "Honey, I know you're sentimental," she said, her voice oozing a practiced sympathy. "But it's a very large piece. We need to be practical about the space." The word hung in the air, a tiny flag marking new territory. Worse, she began to wield my own guilt against me like a weapon. One evening, I overheard them in the kitchen, their voices low but sharp. Kevin was complaining about his latest failed business venture, and Claire was comforting him. "Don't worry," she said. "Things are going to change around here very soon. We'll have more than enough room for you to set up a proper home office." I walked in, a knot tightening in my stomach. "What are you talking about?" Claire turned to me, her expression instantly transforming into one of sweet concern. "Oh, Michael, we were just talking. You know how much you sacrificed these past few years. You gave so much. You deserve a break. Let's handle the stressful things like the house. You've done enough." It was a brilliant, toxic maneuver. She was validating my sacrifice while simultaneously using it to sideline me. She made it sound like my desire to have a say in my own home was an ungrateful refusal of their help. My shadow of guilt did the rest. The memory of my exhaustion, of my moment of anger at my mother's bedside, would rise up and silence me. A part of me felt I didn't have the right to complain, that I didn't deserve to. The breaking point arrived on a cold, drizzly Sunday evening. The sky was the color of slate, and a miserable chill had seeped into the old house. I had spent the day in the attic, sorting through boxes of my father's old books, feeling the quiet ache of missing them both. When I came downstairs, my hands gray with dust, I found Claire and Kevin waiting for me in the living room. They were sitting side by side on the sofa, facing the entryway like a two-person tribunal. There were no drinks, no television on. The air was thick with a rehearsed seriousness. "Michael," Claire began, her voice even and devoid of its usual false warmth. "We need to talk about the future." Kevin leaned forward, elbows on his knees, assuming a posture of what he must have thought was mature authority. "This house is a huge asset, Mike. We need to be smart about it." I stood there by the staircase, my hand still on the polished oak newel post my father had carved decades ago. I knew, with a sudden, sickening certainty, that this was it. This was the moment the charade ended. "What about the house?" I asked, my own voice sounding distant to my ears. Claire took a deep breath, a performer preparing for her big line. "You haven't contributed financially to this household in 5 years, Michael. You've been living here for free. Meanwhile, my brother," she gestured to Kevin, "needs a stable place to get back on his feet. A real home base to build his future." The words were so outrageous, so profoundly insulting, that for a moment I could only stare. Living here for free? I had sacrificed my career, my income, my sanity, my life, to care for my dying mother in her own home. This wasn't a financial arrangement. It was the act of a son. "Claire, what are you talking about?" I finally managed, the words catching in my throat. "This is my home. Mom left it to me." A small, cruel smile played on Claire's lips. It was a look I had never seen on her before, and it was terrifying. It was the look of a predator that knows its prey is cornered. "She left the house, Michael. A property," she said, her voice cutting and precise. "You were just the live-in staff. Your job is done now. The live-in staff." The phrase hit me like a physical blow. It was designed to annihilate me, to reduce 5 years of love and devotion to a simple, dismissible transaction. I looked at this woman, my wife of 15 years, and saw a complete stranger. The warmth, the shared history, the life we had built. It was all a facade, a flimsy set that had just been torn down to reveal the cold, empty stage behind it. I finally found my voice, laced with a fury that burned away the fog of my grief. "Get out," I said, the words low and shaking. "Both of you, get out of my mother's house." Kevin snorted, a little puff of derision. "It's not that simple, buddy." But it was Claire who delivered the final, devastating blow. She stood up, smoothing down her designer slacks, the picture of calm, victorious control. "Actually, it is simple, Michael. We've spoken to a lawyer. Under state law, this house is a marital asset, and your lack of income puts you in a very weak position." She paused, letting the words sink in, twisting the knife. Then she delivered the kill shot. "You've been a freeloader long enough," she said, her voice as cold and hard as a gravestone. "We've already changed the locks. It's time for you to go." I stared at her, uncomprehending. "The locks?" I took a step toward the front door, my heart pounding a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. I reached for the handle, turned it. Nothing. It was locked solid from the inside. I fumbled in my pocket for my keys, my fingers clumsy and numb. I pulled them out, found the house key, and pushed it into the lock. It wouldn't turn. It wouldn't even go in all the way. They had really done it. I turned back to them. Kevin was looking at his shoes, a coward to the last. But Claire was watching me, her eyes triumphant. She had won. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. A strange, glacial calm settled over me. The shock was so profound it had frozen all other emotions. I slowly took the now useless house key off my keyring. I walked over to the mahogany side table by the door, the one where my mother always left her reading glasses, and I placed the key on its polished surface. Then I turned, opened the small coat closet, and took out the jacket I'd worn to the funeral. I put it on, walked to the front door, and without another word, without a backward glance, I unbolted it from the inside and walked out into the cold, drizzling rain. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, the sound of my life being severed in two. I was homeless. I was betrayed, and I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The rain was cold, but I barely felt it. I walked, I don't know for how long. The quiet, tree-lined streets of my childhood neighborhood blurred into a meaningless watercolor of streetlights and wet pavement. Each splash of a passing car, each rustle of dead leaves on the sidewalk, seemed amplified in the roaring silence of my shock. Live-in staff. Freeloader. We've changed the locks. The words played on a loop in my head, a vicious, grinding mantra of betrayal. My first coherent thought was of a cheap motel off the highway, a place of transient anonymity where I could just disappear. But as I stood shivering under the awning of a closed bakery, fumbling for my phone with numb fingers, another name came to mind. Dave. Dave and I had been friends since high school. He was a contractor, a big, gruff man with hands like leather and a loyalty as solid as the foundations he poured. He answered on the second ring. Mike, what's up? You sound terrible. I tried to explain, but my voice kept breaking. The words came out in a disjointed, pathetic stream. Claire, Kevin, the house, the locks. Whoa, slow down, he said, his voice instantly sharp with concern. Where are you? I told him. Stay right there. I'm 10 minutes away. He pulled up in his beat-up Ford pickup, the engine rumbling like a loyal beast. He took one look at my face, soaked and pale, and didn't ask another question. He just opened the passenger door. Get in, he said. At his small, cluttered house, he sat me down at the kitchen table, wrapped my hands around a mug of scalding hot coffee, and listened. As I recounted the entire conversation, every cruel word, every calculated look, I saw his expression harden from concern to a slow-burning rage. When I finished, he slammed his fist on the table, making the coffee mugs jump. That's not just a betrayal, Mike. That's a declaration of war, he seethed. Those vultures, they waited until your mom was gone, and they pounced. You can't let them get away with this. You need to call your mom's lawyer. Now, my mother's lawyer, Mr. Davies. The name cut through the fog of my despair. I had his card in my wallet. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely dial a number, but his voicemail picked up. I left a rambling, desperate message. The next morning, sitting on Dave's lumpy guest room bed, my phone rang. It was Mr. Davies himself. His voice was old but clear, like a well-tuned instrument. Michael, he said, and there was a note of kindness in his voice that almost made me break down. I received your message. I'm so very sorry for what you're going through. Your mother was a very wise woman. I think you should come to my office this morning. There are some things you need to see. Mr. Davies' office was downtown in an old brick building with a real elevator operator. It smelled of old paper, leather, and polish. It felt like a place where truth still mattered. He was a small, bird-like man in a perfectly tailored three-piece suit, with eyes that seemed to see right through you. He listened patiently as I recounted the events again, his fingertips steepled together. He didn't interrupt once. When I was done, he nodded slowly. Their interpretation of marital property law is aggressive and deeply flawed in this context, he said calmly. But they are mistaken about a fundamental fact. Your mother, you see, did not leave the house to you in her will. My heart plummeted. She didn't. Was it possible? Had she left it to Claire, to both of us? Had I misunderstood everything? No, Mr. Davies said, seeing the panic on my face. She did something much smarter. She placed the house, its contents, and a substantial investment portfolio into a revocable trust nearly 2 years ago. You, Michael, are the named trustee. He slid a thick, leather-bound document across the vast expanse of his mahogany desk. But what does that mean? I asked, my voice hoarse. It means, the lawyer said, a faint, dry smile touching his lips, that the house is not part of your marital estate. It belongs to the trust. But that is not the most important detail. He leaned forward. Your mother was a shrewd judge of character. She worried about this exact scenario. And so, She had me include a very specific, very powerful clause in the trust documents. He flipped open the binder to a tab page. I call it the betrayal clause. It states, he cleared his throat and read, should the trustee, my son Michael, be unjustly and without cause forced from the home, or should his spouse, Claire, act in a manner that constitutes a fundamental betrayal of their marital vows for the purpose of seizing control of the trust's assets. He paused, looking at me over his spectacles, and then he handed me a thick, cream-colored envelope, my mother's elegant handwriting gracing the front. My name. It was sealed with wax. She left this for you, Mr. Davies said gently, to be opened in this event. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Her words, her voice, rose from the page. My dearest Michael, if you are reading this, then my worst fears have come pass. I have watched you sacrifice your life for me, while I have watched your wife and her brother watch you. I have seen their greed in their eyes. I pray I am wrong, but if I am not, this letter is your shield and your sword. The trust is clear. Upon any attempt to unjustly remove you from this home by your spouse, full and sole ownership of the house and all its contents, along with the entire investment portfolio, transfers to you alone, effective immediately. She will be entitled to nothing. Do not feel guilty for the anger you may feel. It is the price of your love. Now use it. Protect yourself. This is my final gift to you, your freedom. Your loving mother, Eleanor. I read it twice, then a third time, the words blurring through my tears. But these weren't tears of grief or despair. They were tears of shock, of gratitude, and of a cold, clarifying rage. The guilt that had weighed me down for so long was burned away in that moment, replaced by the steel of my mother's love and the sharp edge of her foresight. She hadn't just seen their greed. She had set a trap for it, and they had walked right in. What do we do now? I asked Mr. Davies, my voice no longer shaking but steady and hard. Now, he said, closing the binder with a decisive snap. We arrange a meeting. The meeting was set for the next afternoon in the dining room of my house. My house. Mr. Davies had informed Claire's lawyer that we wished to discuss an amicable settlement. They took the bait. I walked through the front door with Mr. Davies at my side. Claire and Kevin were there, sitting at the dining table with their lawyer, a slick-looking man with too many teeth. Claire looked at me with a flicker of surprise. Then her expression settled into one of smug pity. They thought I had come to beg. Their lawyer started, outlining their generous offer. They would allow me to take my personal belongings and would not sue me for past rent, provided I signed a document relinquishing any and all claims to the property. I let him finish. The room was silent. I looked at Claire, at her triumphant face, and I felt nothing but a vast, cold distance. Then I slowly, deliberately slid the leather-bound trust binder and my mother's letter across the polished wood of the table. I believe, I said, my voice chillingly calm, that you've misunderstood the terms of my mother's estate. As her lawyer's eyes widened in disbelief, scanning the legal document, I picked up my mother's letter. I read it aloud. Every word. I watched the color drain from Claire's face, her smugness collapsing into slack-jawed horror. Kevin just stared, his mouth agape. They had triggered the exact clause that left her with absolutely nothing. As Claire started to stammer, to bluster about how I was lying, how it was impossible, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize, but the preview showed a name, Mrs. Gable. My mother's next-door neighbor and dear friend. My heart leaped. I excused myself for a moment and called her back. Her voice was trembling with indignation. Michael, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I just saw Claire in her car on the phone. The window was down, and I heard her laughing. She said, he looked so pathetic, didn't he? Like a lost puppy. Michael, your mother would be horrified. The final piece. The indisputable proof of malicious intent. My mind, now sharp and strategic, saw the path forward. Mrs. Gable, I said, my voice steady. Thank you. Thank you more than you know. Would you be willing to write down exactly what you heard and email it to my lawyer? His name is Mr. Davies. I gave her the address. I walked back into the dining room. A few minutes later, Mr. Davies' laptop, sitting on the table, pinged. He turned the screen towards Claire and her lawyer. Displayed there was the email from Mrs. Gable, a clear, damning account of Claire's gloating. Checkmate. It was over. The trap, so lovingly and carefully set by my mother 2 years ago, had finally, devastatingly, sprung shut. The silence that fell over the dining room was absolute. It was a heavy, dead silence, the kind that follows a final, fatal blow. Claire's lawyer, the man with too many teeth, just stared at his laptop screen, his face pale. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing to say. The legal documents were ironclad. The witness testimony was damning. He slowly began packing his briefcase, his movements stiff and defeated. He knew a lost cause when he saw one. Kevin was the first to break. He pushed his chair back, the legs screeching against the hardwood floor. "This is insane," he muttered, looking wildly between me and Claire. "This is a trick." "The only trick," Mr. Davies said, his quiet voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel, "was the one your sister attempted to play on her husband. And it has failed." He then turned his gaze to Claire and Kevin. "The trust is clear. You're trespassing. I advise you to vacate the premises within 24 hours, or we will have you removed by the authorities." That's when Claire finally crumbled. The mask of smug superiority shattered, and behind it was something ugly and desperate. Her face contorted, and she turned to me, her eyes swimming with tears. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of rage and self-pity. "How could you do this to me, Michael?" she wailed, her voice rising. "After everything, I was trying to build a life for us." For the first time, I saw her with perfect, unclouded clarity. I saw the depth of her self-deception, the bottomless pit of her entitlement. And the love I had once felt for her, the dull ache of its absence, was finally gone. In its place was a profound and cleansing calm. "You weren't building a life for us," I said, my voice even, devoid of the anger and pain she so clearly wanted to see. "You didn't just want a house, Claire. You wanted to erase her. You wanted to erase me. But you can't erase 5 years of devotion. You can't erase a mother's love." I looked at her, this stranger who had shared my bed for 15 years. "You have nothing because you valued nothing." She had no answer to that. The next 24 hours were a surreal blur. I stayed at Dave's house while Claire and Kevin removed their belongings. I didn't go back. I didn't want to see them. Mr. Davies arranged for a locksmith to meet me there the following afternoon. When I finally walked back through my front door, the house was silent again. But it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't heavy with grief anymore. It was light. It was clean. It was mine. The first few weeks were strange. I wandered through the rooms, reacquainting myself with the space, with myself. I threw out the expensive, soulless decorative pillows Claire had bought. I packed away the gaudy chrome lamps she insisted on. I was slowly, methodically reclaiming my home. One afternoon, cleaning out my mother's bedside table, I found something I'd never seen before. Tucked away at the very back of a drawer was a small, leather-bound journal. It was her private journal from her last year. My hands trembled as I opened it. Most entries were about her day-to-day feelings, her pain, her memories. But one, dated about 6 months before she passed, stopped my heart. "Michael worries me," she had written. "He gives too much of himself away. I see the toll it takes on him, the weariness behind his smile. He carries the weight of everyone, especially Claire, who seems to demand so much and give so little. I pray he remembers his own worth when I am gone." I closed the journal, pressing it to my chest, and I wept. I wept for her love, for her incredible foresight, and for the fact that she had seen me so clearly, even when I couldn't see myself. It felt like she was reaching out across the void, giving me permission to finally put my own well-being first. My first real act of healing began in the backyard. My mother's rose garden, her greatest pride, had become choked with weeds during the last few months of her life. I spent an entire weekend on my knees in the dirt. I pulled out thorny vines and stubborn crabgrass. I pruned back the deadwood. With every weed I ripped from the soil, I felt like I was ripping out a piece of the toxicity that had poisoned my life. I was tending to something, nurturing it back to health. I was nurturing myself. Life began to find a new rhythm. I took a portion of the investment funds my mother had left and used it as seed money. I converted the old sunroom into a bright, airy office and started my own small architectural firm, just as I'd always dreamed of doing. I decided to specialize in the restoration and preservation of historic homes. It felt right. It felt like honoring the past while building a future. My first client was Mrs. Gable. She called me one day, her voice warm and cheerful. "Michael, dear," she said, "I've always wanted a proper English greenhouse for my garden. And I hear there's a wonderful new architect in the neighborhood." My new family became a small, tight-knit group. Dave would come over on Sundays for football, filling the house with his booming laughter. Mrs. Gable would bring over homemade pies and tell me stories about my mother I'd never heard. It was a family built not on obligation or appearances, but on genuine affection and mutual respect. Tonight, I'm sitting in the backyard, a cool glass of iced tea in my hand. The first of my mother's roses are starting to bloom again, deep crimson and pale pink against the vibrant green leaves. The setting sun is casting a warm, golden light over the house, my house. A profound sense of peace settles over me. For years, I felt guilty for my secret moments of weakness while caring for my mother. I let that guilt blind me, let it make me vulnerable to a manipulation I should have seen coming. Now I understand. My mother didn't just leave me a house. She left me a roadmap back to myself. The betrayal was the fire, but her love was the steel it forged. It's a piece forged in pain, and for that, it is unbreakable. It's a quiet life, a simple one, but it is entirely, authentically my own. What's the hardest lesson a loved one has ever taught you, even after they were gone?